Welcome. I'm Ron Lichty, and I wrote this book, Managing the Unmanageable, Rules, Tools, and Insights for Managing Software People and Teams. I'm going to ask you about yourselves in a minute. I presume there are at least a couple of managers in the room, and I'd love to get a sense of that. But before I do, I'll share a little bit about myself. I was originally a programmer. I worked for one of these companies. I worked for a two-person consulting company for about 7 years programming. Got a couple of patents, wrote embedded microcontroller code, wrote word processing software, wrote multimedia applications, wrote entertainment software, wrote a couple of books on programming, and thought I had the best job in the whole world. There was one company I wanted to work for that made me an offer of a job that I couldn't do in a two-person consulting company that I was managing. I was really intrigued by this notion of managing, and I allowed myself to be recruited. That company was Apple Computer, and it was about 25 years ago. And I went to Apple and I managed product management of development tools, actually, for about a year and a half. And as Apple was wont to do in those days, at least, it reorged. And I took the opportunity and went back to being a programmer. And about a month after I started my programming job, my manager came to me and said, "We really need a manager." I found myself managing again. And about 6 or 8 months later, I managed to get myself back into a programming role, and about 6 weeks after that, my manager came to me and said, "We need a manager." And so it was about the third time that I went back and forth that I realized that I accepted my fate. And it helped me going through those processes to kind of identify that I, in fact, really did want to be a manager. That was really helpful. So all of these other companies are companies that I either managed at or I have recently consulted with. 2 years ago, I looked back on my career and realized that since Apple Computer, almost all of the management I've been doing has been being pulled into companies to untangle the knots in software development, to make software development hum, to transform chaos to clarity. And I 2 years ago began consulting to do those kinds of things because I like working with more organizations and getting that input and getting that insight. And you can imagine if I've spent the last 20 or 25 years untangling the knots in software development, that I was a pretty easy mark for Agile, because it's a great tool in the toolbox when you're trying to make software development run better, more profitably. I want to know about you. So the word management actually gets applied in a number of ways. So there are product managers, there are project managers, there are program managers. Who we wrote this book for, what this talk tonight is about, is people managers. If your company has performance reviews, you probably write them. So if you are, or if you have ever been a people manager, would you stand up? Okay, so stay standing, please. So there's three parts to this. That's the first part. The second part is, if you have had a day or more of training in being a people manager, stay standing. Okay, so about half the room sat down. So that was the big question of whether it's a day or not, right? So I can be close. I understand. So all of you who had training before you became a manager, at least a day or more of training in people management before you became a manager for the first time, stay standing. Okay, so we have 3 people still standing. I don't know what to do with the people who are standing around in the corners of the room, but we've got 3 people still standing who are in the census. So that's roughly what I see is maybe 5%. It's a little bit higher here. Okay, you can sit down now. Thank you. So isn't it odd how long we expect programmers to train in programming and how little training we expect of managers? Isn't that interesting? So, as I said, this was true for my co-author and me. We both became managers without having any management training before we became managers. we learned it on the job. I had the good luck to go to Apple, which had a lot of management training. My co-author was in a couple of big companies, and he got some management training. There is some good training that the big companies provide to those of us who are managers. The medium-sized companies, some of them used to, fewer than ever do, and the small companies mainly don't, and we have to go after it on our own. The other thing that I found, and Vicki and I both found, was there are very few books for programming managers. So there are a ton of books on project management. There are a ton of books on Agile. There are a ton of books just on XP or on Scrum. And there are a ton of general management books. But those of you who manage programmers know that managing programmers is different. Actually, you have at least an insight that managing programmers is different from managing, say, salespeople or even hardware engineers. I talked to the IEEE about a year ago, and somebody there said, you know, programmers are really different from hardware engineers. I said, yeah, I know. I've worked with hardware engineers too, and we are fairly unique. So that was partly why Mickey and I wrote this book. Was there just wasn't very much out there, and we wanted to share the experience that we'd had. I led a session at Agile Open a year ago, and this is all a kind of a gathering, a kind of mothership of Agile folks coming together and talking. And I led a session on what are the challenges for managers of Agile teams. And we broke into 3 different groups, and the 3 different groups went off and talked about this, and they came back, and the one thing that all 3 of them had in common was managers don't have enough training. Now, Dean Leffingwell was down here in the Bay Area a year and a half ago, and he was giving a talk, and he was talking about when factories in Japan convert to lean. So think about this, a factory in Japan wants to convert to lean. Who do they send off to training first? Managers, yes. How long do you think they send managers off to training before they even tell the rest of the factory that they're going to convert to a different approach?
Months.
Months, what was that? Sorry, I can't hear up here. You have to shout.
1 week.
1 week? Actually, what he said was between 2 weeks and 6 weeks, so the months is closer. A minimum of 2 weeks, and often as much as 6 weeks. Now, have any of you ever had training, had that much training in anything? And when we trained our teams in Agile, well, I answered that question. Who did we train? So we send managers to the training that our teams get, but do we train managers in Agile? So it's a real challenge. So here's the problem. This is the canonical picture when we train our teams in Agile. Has everybody seen this? Everybody gone through an Agile training? So we draw this picture. We've got the team with the small t down here, and we've got the team with the big T here. It's got a scrum master and a product owner. We've got stakeholders and a business owner. It can also look like this. You know, we break out more things. We break out UI designers. We break out writers. We break out architects. You see a manager in that picture? Or that one? Not there. Not there. So what managers are left with, everything around them just changed. The organization changed, their peers changed, their relationships with things changed, the process changes, everything they know changes, and they're left with their hands in their pockets trying to figure out what their role is. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And I'm going to start with this quote from Mike Cohn, who wrote Succeeding with Agile, which is a great book, and also wrote the book on stories, writing Agile stories, user stories. Mike said, "A common misconception is that because of this reliance on self-organizing teams, there's little or no role for leaders of Agile teams. Nothing could be further from the truth." So as we go along, I'm going to share with you a few rules of thumb. Mickey and I were both, as kids, enamored with rules of thumb, like measure twice, cut once. Remember that one? From like Ben Franklin's time. It wasn't Ben Franklin who conglomerated it, but does that apply to software? Measure twice, cut once. The Mars orbiter programmers sure wished that they had measured twice before they sent instructions to the Mars orbiter satellite in English measurements when they had programmed it in metric.
Now, there's something spirit of Agile.
The spirit of Agile is high discipline. So there are rules of thumb, and you all probably know Brooks' law from Mythical Man Law. Adding resources to a late project makes it later. Those are the kinds of things that we can use. That's kind of simple statements of core truths that we can use in our jobs. And Mickey and I had been having breakfast with each other for 10 years at the point at which we decided to start writing this book and thought, we've been sharing these rules of thumb back and forth of how to manage programmers and make our jobs a little bit easier and maybe manage our managers, our bosses who seemed like maybe they'd forgotten what programming was like. And you know, you need to be able to say, you know, adding resources to a late project, I didn't make that up. Fred Brooks wrote that in the 1960s. You know, we could take advantage of that kind of thing. So that's what rules of thumb are for, and I'm going to scatter a few of them through, and we just saw a nugget of wisdom from Mike Cohn. I also want to point out, as we talk about Agile, so this is just managing programmers. This is the table of contents of our book, basically. 9 chapters wrapped around those rules of thumb. Then we give away a whole bunch of tools that you can download from our website with the book. And, you know, walk down that. So what's unique about managing programmers? What's unique about us as programmers? How do we differ from each other? How do we differ from other people? How do we recruit programmers? How do we hire them? How do we bring them on board? How do we motivate our teams? How do we create a culture that supports our teams? And then how do we deliver software? Well, managing software, successful software delivery, which we walk through in both a waterfall way and an agile way, but we walk through it in a blended way. We walk through it in all those ways, but that's the one that really differs a lot based on what it is you're doing, whether we're doing agile or whether we're doing waterfall. The rest of those are jobs that we have as managers, regardless. It's the nuances that change. And we're about to do an exercise, and we're going to talk about those nuances. And just before we go to that, I want you to think about the idea that it's really not about, do we need managers? Because if you're like me, you've noticed what I've noticed. Managers haven't gone away as we've gone agile. But the real question is, what do managers do? And we've got sort of 4 categories of that. One is some of the things that managers did that we still need to be doing, that our teams count on us to do, and our companies count on us to do. Sometimes they are roles that change, and sometimes even dramatically. And sometimes they change so dramatically that we need to stop doing them. We need to deprecate those and use a programming term. And then there are some management roles that are new with Agile. What I'm having them hand out is a page of 50 traditional responsibilities of managers. So everything from hiring great programmers to coaching and mentoring your teams to managing projects. Notice, as you get one of these, there's a grid on the left-hand side. So I don't know about you, but what I tend to do when I get grids is I start thinking about what's important and what's not. That's not the exercise here. The exercise here is, how much does it change when we move from something that's not agile into something that's agile? So these are all either 50 roles of managers, and for each one of these roles of managers, does it not change at all, or does it change a lot? Does that make sense? Anybody know what Fist to 5 is? It's kind of method of voting. It's something we use in Agile a lot. I use it to measure confidence in a planning session when we're planning sprints. But in this particular case, we can use it in this way. So Fist to 5, we've got the range from 0, not at all in this case, to it changes a lot, with 4 other measures in between, right? So we go from doesn't change at all to changes a lot. Now, one of the characteristics about Fist to 5 is we decide what it is we each decide what it is we're gonna vote. We all raise our hands at the same time, and we keep our hands high, don't change our votes based on what other people's hands are. And then we look around the room. So the important thing is, and when we use it, and one of the reasons we use it is there's no right answer. There is no right answer to these things. What we're looking for is the discussion of what can this tell us about what it is we're doing. So let's take that very first one, hire great programmers. So think about just for a minute, don't raise your hands yet, don't raise your hands. So think about, does it change a little? Does it change not at all? Does it change a lot? So 0 to 5, 0 fingers to 5 fingers. Hiring great programmers. Everybody ready? 1, 2, 3, raise your hand, show us your votes. Okay. This is exactly like every room I've ever been in, and I've done this, because there are fists and there are 5s. And there are 1s and 4s and 3s and 2s too. So does somebody want to, who made one of those votes want to tell us why? Yeah.
So if you try Scrum or an Agile...
What was your vote?
Sorry?
What was your vote? It was a 2, 3.
People have to be more reliable. If you do waterfall, it's for the beginner, and they have static procedure. If it was agile, you have to rely on everyone that they do their part. So
Okay, so it changes a bunch, changes some, somewhere between some and bunch, and it's because we need people who are more reliable than we were hiring before.
more experienced.
More experienced, maybe. Okay, another vote right here.
Actually,
What?
I think you always need great people.
You always need great
that's
people. What was your vote?
That's what I think.
This one.
It didn't change at all,
Yeah.
because you always need great people.
Yeah.
Your vote.
So,
What was your vote?
4.
4, okay.
Since Agile is fundamentally a team exercise, you really have to fit the team first. And that also means you have to fit a gap in the team. You can't really reproduce something that's already there unless there's a darn good reason for it to be there. So there are significant communication and team issues that a lot of great programmers suck at.
So we need to look for different skill sets, different kinds of people to hire. So we'll always hire great people, but we need to look for different kinds of people. So that's actually the kind of spread that I often get when I ask this question. Now let's do another one of these. This one is grow skills and careers. So think about it, don't raise your hands yet. Grow skills and careers. So this is the third one down. How would you vote? It doesn't change at all. Growing skills and careers of our people as managers. Doesn't change at all, changes a lot. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, we got exactly the spread that I always get. 0 to 5. Okay. So who wants to share why one of those? And tell us what your vote was first. Somebody who didn't share before. Yeah.
Mine was a 2, because I think when you're working on an agile team, the team itself is helping the individual, grow their own career. So that's the change. It's going to become a team responsibility, and more of a team responsibility and less of a manager responsibility. But the manager still has responsibility.
So there's some mix of responsibility suddenly by managing agile teams. That's interesting. Anybody who did a 5 or a 0 want to call out the reason? Yeah.
I said 0 because it's a process, right? Career growth and all this other sort of, career-oriented stuff has to be still done anyway. I'm not seeing the difference.
Yeah. It's always been our job, right?
Right.
I'm a manager. It's always been my job to grow my people. Anybody who voted 5?
Actually, I also was 0, but even though when you introduce Agile, the mix changes because people have another venue, they will show themselves, etc. But a good manager actually should recognize that different people have different needs, different paths. So the role of a manager does not change. They always have to be flexible to look what's best for the individual.
The role as a manager doesn't change. So I had somebody who I I initially voted 0. My initial take on this was, and I was enlightened by doing this the very first time I did it, by somebody who raised their hand with a 5 and said, I know it has always been my job, but I've never had time to. I was too busy managing the project, and I wasn't managing my people. I thought, and so it's a massive change for me. Suddenly I have time to do the job that I was hired to do. And I was so taken by that realization that, you know, I think all of these are true statements, right? I mean, we all have our own experience of this. But it changed my thinking about it, and that's what I want to do with this and have some discussions. So what I want to do is I want you each to take 3 minutes. We're gonna have some discussions, but each of you take 3 minutes to fill out every one of those rows in the sheet. Let's start at the back. So this group was working on the larger organization down here in front. You're working in your organization. Sorry, this group was working on that one. So what was the biggest surprise to you?
The rest is
Actually, not a lot.
Not a lot of surprises.
Mostly agreed with some certain amount of trash.
Mostly agreed, but some amount of trash. Okay, that's good. Any particular one stand out for anybody? That was interesting?
I think it was, we were arguing over who we're talking about.
In your organization, who are you?
You be the manager.
Oh,
So is it
Yeah,
your
yeah,
team, is it
yeah,
your
sorry.
team or the larger?
So these are responsibilities of managers. So if it's your organization, it's, you know, it's your team, it's your organization, however big your organization is. Yeah, okay. Sorry for the ambiguity on that one. Not, unlike requirements, which never have ambiguities.
No, of course not.
My sheet did. So this group was doing the last stuff, right? So surprises for you?
Well, disagreement, but other
Disagreement. Oh, interesting. Any interesting disagreements?
Well, we didn't actually get too far down the list, but we did notice that we did have differences, like it wasn't like 0s and 5s, but 2 and 4.
All right, any of the other groups want to call out? So the important thing here is that there's a lot to think about how management changes. Anybody else want to call out anything that they found that was particularly surprising? So I called out the one for me that was the growing your people one of, wow, I finally have time to do this. That was a real aha for me. Any other surprises? Back in the back?
Well, I think you mentioned ambiguity, and I think that actually was a good thing in one sense because it drove discussion. Some of us read the question differently and came at it from different ends, but then found the discussion to be insightful. And I guess the other aspect was struggling over, it doesn't change the importance of many of these things, but it's the how of how you actually accomplish it.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? It changes the how, not necessarily the what. Yeah, and I found that to be true as well. Any other quick observations?
Yeah, there was some ambiguity, we with hired great programmers. Well, some programmers are great programmers, but not necessarily good team members. And, you know, this is a case where it changes if you, how you define great programmer in this, for Agile.
It does. It truly does. Okay, great. So there are a lot of observations that I could share with you tonight from 15 years working with in Agile and from 10 years managing teams that are working in Agile, and from 5 years I've been training teams in Agile for the last 5 years. But I picked out these 7 to talk about, some of which are new, some of which have changed, and some of which are the same. So let's start with creating an Agile culture. This is a role that I believe managers can play if they just knew that it was a role for them to play. And it starts with, we brought just say this quickly. We brought three, in a nutshell, three theories of management into our book. You've all heard of Maslow, I imagine, the hierarchy of needs. Everybody shakes their heads when we say Maslow. The other two are McGregor and Hertzberg. This is McGregor. McGregor had the XY theory. What McGregor said was that the traditional, and the X theory is the traditional management that we know that started with the Industrial Revolution. It's management pushing down. He used words like authoritarian and repressive style and tight control. And what he said was that for the economy and the companies and the kinds of organizations we have now, that we need to flip that on its head, and management needs to support our staff. And he used words like liberating and developmental and continuous improvement. Does that sound like anything to you? Those are words we use in Agile. So words we use to describe servant leaders, which is a phrase we use in Agile. And anybody know when he wrote this? This is from basically 1960. So Agile is a way for our software development organizations to catch up with the change in thinking about management that happened 60 years ago.
Well, did it change or just was the theory published?
Well, thank you for asking that question, because I don't know the answer to that anywhere outside of programming, but I know it didn't change much in programming. So here's Alan Shalloway, who said, lean agile management is the art of leading people, not managing them. Leading people involves creating the correct environment, focusing them on the right things, and trusting them to do their work. In lean agile, the manager has two primary responsibilities: setting the outcomes or goals expected of the team, and assisting the doers in creating a better process. That's what we're talking about here. So I heard this one at Agile Open a year ago. Management sets the boundaries of what needs to be done and says to the team, I trust you to figure out how to get it done. So again, we're setting the boundaries and we're creating the culture that will help to support that. So one of my favorite rules of thumb around the kind of management we need to be, and I think this is the kind of management we need to be whether we're Agile or whether we're doing waterfall, is this one. Who said trust but verify?
Reagan.
Who said it before Reagan?
Khrushchev, wasn't it?
No.
No, Stalin did.
Vladimir Lenin.
Oh, really?
Lenin said it before Reagan did. And it is in fact the imperative not to micromanage and the sort of essence of delegation. And it talks about setting outcomes for teams. Here's the second one of that pair that I also really like. This is Alan Lefkoff, who was the CEO of Netopia, a technology company, a few years ago, who told me that he learned it from Lou Gerstner when both of them were McKinsey consultants. I inspect what I expect. And it's not telling people what to do, but it's making sure that what people are doing is what we need. So Mickey and I considered establishing a great culture to be so important that we wrote a whole chapter about it. And we talked about the how of developing a programming culture. And so first you have to figure out what a good programming culture is that supports your team and that helps them to be great and creates high performance. And then you need to figure out what your corporate culture is, and then there's this kind of blocking out the parts of the corporate culture that don't work and the adding to the programming culture to make it the kind of culture that you need it to be. So let's talk about supporting Agile values. This is the second one that is brand new for managers, stuff that we've never done before until we walk into an Agile organization. So I'm also the co-author of the study of product team performance. And the study of product team performance every year. So the first year, 2012, I was a member of the authoring team of these two. The year before that was the first one, and they did something that was really interesting. They did a number of things that were really interesting. One of them was they took a census of what people are using, and they took a census of are you using Agile, or using blended, or using waterfall, or using lean. And we've done that each of the 3 years since. And so here's what the census looks like. So Agile has, over the course of the last 3 years, increased by almost 3 times. Waterfall has fallen by about half. And blended stayed roughly the same, and then we changed the terminology, so we're not sure about the right-hand side. We changed the terminology from lean to Kanban because lean startup came along and really muddied the waters. Lean startup is not lean development. It's related, but it's not the same thing. So in 2013, in the second year of the study, we did a second thing, which was to ask people which of these they thought would make their product more profitable. And then we cross-correlated. And this is the table. And so these are the methodology that you use. This is the methodology you use on the left. So the people who use Agile, more than not, said, we think Agile would make our product more profitable. The people who use blended, some blend of Agile and Waterfall, said, we think blended, more of them than not, said, we think blended would make our product more profitable. The people who said lean, more often than not, said, we think lean will make it more profitable. The people who use Waterfall, more often than not, said, give us anything but Waterfall to make our product more profitable. This was jaw-dropping for me, and it was jaw-dropping for me because I feel like I know a lot of executives who think that Waterfall is a profitable way to develop software.
So who was providing these answers?
These are individuals on teams.
So
Thousands of individuals on teams. You can go to my website and get the summaries and download the studies and you can do all.
Not those who make a decision to adopt Waterfall.
Right. These are not the executives.
Okay.
Well, there are a few executives among it, but mostly it's team members. Mm-hmm. It's the study of teams, and we ask team members to sign up. So. Even though, but team members recognize the waste in Waterfall. So Waterfall is wasteful, but Waterfall seemed easy, right? It's very concrete. We do this phase and then we have a gate. And then we do this phase and then we have a gate. And we do this phase, it's very concrete. Agile looks fairly easy. We got a bunch of practice. It's just a bunch of practices, right? We have a stand-up every morning and we have a planning meeting and we have a demo and gee, how easier could it get? But it's really not. And it's really not because Agile's really not about the practices. Agile's really a philosophy. It's a spirit, in a way. And what's hard is breathing life into the practices. We sort of need the practices in order to provide goodness. But the practices themselves won't do it, and then we see the practices degrade so that, I walk into companies and they say, oh yeah, we do stand-ups. We're sitting down. No, they're not 15 minutes. They take us a half an hour and sometimes an hour. What, there are 3 questions to ask during a stand-up? Oh, really? Tell me what they are. So they degrade. So even when they don't degrade, the challenge is that we all know that we can go to class every day and not end up being educated. We can go to church every Sunday and not end up being saints. And we can do all the Agile practices and not end up being Agile. And the agility comes through the values and the principles, which are at agilemanifesto.org. This is the stuff that they came up with in 2001 when they said, oh, Crystal and XP and Scrum and Kanban and blah, blah, and blah, blah, and blah, blah. There are about 12 different ways of doing development at the time that these people got together, and they said, these are all, let's use the word Agile because they're really pretty similar to each other, and this is what we have in common. We have these values and these principles. And there are 12 of them. That's about 4.5 right there. And what our challenge for all of us who are on Agile teams is valuing the Agile Manifesto over the sets of practices and using those values, using that spirit of Agile to customize the practices to our culture and our products and our people and but through that window, through the lens of the values and the principles. That's our challenge. So as a trainer of Agile teams, I have more and more looked for how can I, as a trainer, make the values and the principles the mantra that we look at all the rest of it through, all the roles, all the practices, all the cadence, all of those wonderful things about Agile. But what makes them wonderful is not the practices. That's a collection of stuff at Home Depot, but the spirit of Agile itself. So the third one is empowering self-organization and excellence. And in a lot of ways, I don't know about you, but in a lot of ways, I have been trying to foment self-organization and excellence for most of my management career. Here's Esther Derby, who is one of the co-founders of the Scrum Alliance. When teams self-organize, there's still plenty for managers to do. A manager's job is to engineer the organization so teams can do their best work. Sort of similar to, setting the boundaries, to providing the resources, to creating the culture, it's empowering self-organization and excellence. So one of the things we have always done as managers is be dampers to the noise. But when we have Agile organizations, we have new kinds of noise that's going on. Because what I find is that there are a whole lot of executives and a whole lot of people in the other parts of the organization who say, oh, that Agile thing, that's what those developers over there do. Without realizing that we in HR need to change how we review people. And we in finance need to change how we do our calculations of finance and capitalization and a whole bunch of stuff in that arena. And we in management need to stop thinking when we're going to do a layoff that we're going to give a haircut to every team. Anybody heard that phrase? We're going to have a haircut for every team. Like, oh, why don't we decide what's important? Keep the teams that are working on stuff that's important, but keep stable teams together, not give haircuts. Or let's reward the heroes who came in at the last minute, forgetting that we've got people who work day in and day out to get those products done in the first place. One of the things this is the third one. This is the third one of those management theories. This is Hertzberg. And this was one of the great surprises to me as a manager. Coming up through programming, and I never believed I would find myself reading the Harvard Business Review. This was reported out in a 1980s Harvard Business Review article that is still the most reprinted Harvard Business Review article of all time that they've ever published. There are millions of copies out there. And most of us in the programming world have still never seen it. And it differentiates, it says, the things that motivate us, there are not as many of those as we think. And there are an equal number of things that demotivate us. There are satisfiers and dissatisfiers. And I don't have time to show you all of Hertzberg's work, let alone to recast this one, but I'll give you an idea. Mickey and I took Hertzberg's work, which is across the board, all employees, factories, knowledge work, the whole bunch, and said, for programmers, this is what this means, that the thing that motivates us more than anything else is making a difference in the world. I don't know about you, but that was part of why I became a programmer. And learning and growing, and tools and technology, and recognition and praise, and having fun, and only then upside. Only then do we have something related to money. In fact, that's very similar to Hertzberg, but it's slightly different. And if we look at so those are the motivators. The red ones are the demotivators, the dissatisfiers, the things that drive us crazy about our organization. So there are a couple of these that are the same. So if we don't get learning and growing in our organizations, we get dissatisfied. If we don't have fun in our organizations, we get dissatisfied. But the big one here is respect for supervisor. That's us. There's an HR rule of thumb that says that people don't leave companies, they leave managers. And here's ethical management and company policies and administration and working conditions. Now, anybody in this room ever gone to a company because of its company policies and administration? It's not a motivator, but it sure as heck is a demotivator if it sucks. So we need to understand those kinds of things to help motivate and support our teams. Then there's the notion of scaling Scrum, and so it's really easy to look at a Scrum team that when we've got one team working independently in our companies, right? It's 7 plus or minus 2 people. That's somewhere between 5 and 11 people, and we can deal with that, and it's really simple. But when we've got multiple teams all working together, that's a management problem. Here's one of the looks at it. This is a case study that SAFE did, the Scaled Agile Framework. That, you know, the traditional way that we organized our teams was by features, was by components, was by technology, was by stuff, was by commonality. So our database people were all part of the same group, and our front end people were all part of the same group, and our back end people were all part of the same group, and they went and talked to each other to get each other to develop part of the stuff. And in Agile, we say, okay, so every team needs to be able to deliver features. So every team has front end and back end and database people. Every team has all of those kinds of things. So here's Henrik Nyberg, who called his team squads, who said, okay, so the way we do that is we organize by chapters. These are what managers manage. Managers manage the database people, they manage the front end people, they manage the server people. They manage them across all those teams. And then he added another layer, which is to say, and there are guilds, and guilds are basically there's this whole craft to programming, right? We all know that. And guilds are basically acknowledging that there's that craft, and it's like, what are we interested in as programmers? And so it pulls together that community of interest. It helps us to foment best practices across all of it. So maybe these are the front end people, and there's a database person and a couple of server people who are also interested in the front end, and so we have a community of interest. And that's something that managers can also make sure happens if we know that that's one of our roles, because our organization's changed and somebody needs to take charge of that. So, removing impediments. Whose job is removing impediments in Agile? Scrum Masters. Who do Scrum Masters escalate to? Managers. Why?
They got the cloud.
The cloud, the authority, the connections into the rest of the organization, right? Removing impediments is a fundamental role of managers. Not the first line, but the second line of removing impediments. Here's Diane Larson, who wrote Agile Retrospectives, who said managers are still needed not so much for their planning and controlling ability, but for the important job of interfacing on the team's behalf with the rest of the organization. So part of that is being an evangelist for their team with the rest of the organization. And part of it is being that umbrella for the noise for the rest of the organization. And part of it's removing impediments and making sure that their teams have the resources they need. And one of those impediments that comes up more, it seems like it's come up more and more often in the last decade. It's this notion of we can't have any slack. We can't have anybody who's not busy. We can't have anybody who doesn't have something to do. So anybody read Tom DeMarco's book, Slack? A couple of hands in the room. Slack covers a lot of different kinds of Slack, but one of them is this. So if I were trying to deliver pizza, which of those streets would I want to do it on? The one without Slack or the one with it? So there are two commonalities of programmers and pizza. One of them is we eat a lot of it, and the other one is I want to be on the street that's got some Slack in it. because I got a much better chance of having a high-performance team. We need as managers to recognize that lines of code has never been a successful and useful way of measuring productivity, nor is butts in seats, nor is minutes in front of screens. It's about delivering value to our customers. And then the bane of all of our programming, of programmers and teams, multitasking and distractions. So how much context does it take to write, if you get interrupted as a programmer writing, you're about to write the next line of code and you get interrupted, what happens?
You lose context completely.
Lose context completely. Okay, good. How long does it take you to rebuild context to write that next line of code?
15 to 30 minutes.
15 to 30 minutes. So if you get interrupted every 15 minutes, how many lines of code do you write during the day? All right, thank you. So then counseling and coaching and mentoring. Here's this one that I said, this has always been our job. And somebody else here said that too. A couple of people said that. I particularly like this picture, even though I think it's really pair programming. So I like the answer that Agile finally gives me time to do my job. And fundamentally, coaching and mentoring are critical parts of our jobs. And then hiring and firing. There are very few Agile teams that want to take on hiring and firing. Now, they want to be part of the hiring. They really don't want to be part of the firing, but they want to be part of the hiring, and they should be, and we need to ensure that they are. Here's the rule of thumb. This one was from Mickey and me. There are actually a couple of those 300 rules of thumb that we wrote. Most of them we've gathered from much smarter than us managers from around the world. Always be recruiting, and it's just this truism that that when we become managers, when we stop being programmers, we've got to change from being introverts to being extroverts. We have to go out and network. We have to come to things like this. We have to stand in front of the room and tell people what we're looking for, and then we have to tell them individually in the food line and everywhere else, and we always have to be recruiting. And one of the reasons is that in most of our organizations, the hiring window comes open and then it slams closed. And when it comes open again, you have to be ready to jump through it. And sometimes it's with a technology that you never knew that you were looking for until a minute ago. And so for a million reasons that's true. And then we also have to be prepared to deal with problem employees, and our teams expect this of us. They always have, they still do. But they know more than ever before the truth of whether they've got a problem employee on their team or not, and they know they've got a problem employee. They don't like it. That person is holding them back. And when we don't act, they either think we're idiots or they think we're incompetent, I guess, unable to do our jobs, unable to take charge of that situation. And I didn't put firing, I put firing up at the top, but I didn't put firing in the bullet. It's dealing with problem employees and learning the techniques of turning problem employees around. So I learned a set of techniques from Marty Brownstein that have been true for me through my career, that executed well will either have an employee turn around or have them quit. Both of which are really great outcomes if you've got a problem employee. And both of which prevent you from having to go to that firing step. This is my summary slide. Managers are critical to Agile. Managers are critical to Agile transformations. And we don't tell managers what those roles are. And the result is we as managers have to figure out Agile. We have to figure out what it's about. We need to figure out what our role is. We need to seek out that information. We need to be proactive, just like everybody else on our team. We expect everybody else on our team to be proactive and self-empowering teams. We have to be self-empowered too to figure this out. You know, Steve Jobs talked about the amazing that if he could hire a bunch of really great programmers, they would all know if he screwed it up and hired somebody who wasn't, and be pissed off at him, because they all wanted to work with other great people. And I think most of us in technical roles, when I was in a technical role, that's what I wanted. I wanted to work with other people with who I could depend on and who I could be a team with, and who we could create amazing things and change the world. And what's the apple? Sorry. Question back here?
So I had this, following up on his comment there, right? So I work for Microsoft. We went through an agile transformation over a year. We had a coach brought in and all kind of stuff. The first thing that happened, Scrum Masters were appointed, and they had to protect the team from the tyranny of the manager, right? So first thing gets happened, you get pulled out of invites, right? All meeting invites that you used to sit in before, and also that information conduit comment that he made said everything kind of you have to go through the Scrum Master to reach the team. I don't know whether it's a natural growing process where both sides learn how to deal with Scrum and the whole transformation process.
Yeah.
But it was a difficult experience to grow through.
Yeah.
I mean, first thing that we ran into, the whole, what I call is like dogmatic versus pragmatic. Like we have to follow all these rituals, all this, ceremonies, right?
Right.
They become more important than what is it that we're trying to do.
Yeah. More than the
So-
spirit of Agile.
So anyway,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I kind of had some hard
There's
experiences.
the challenge. And did you get training as a manager? What's your role?
Yeah,
You-
we got some, but it was never, no, actually, no, I would say no, it was never proper
Yeah.
training. The team,
Yeah.
I think, got training, the
Yeah.
managers they brought people in, special people for managers training, but
okay.
it was never,
It wasn't
nobody felt it
substantial.
was effective.
Wasn't
The
substantial.
difficult questions were
You're
not
still,
answered.
you're still scratching your head at the end.
But anyway, so it was last
Yeah.
year, so.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big change, yes.
So, I've been doing Agile, I don't know, 5-10 years now, not probably longer. And I'm a product owner, so I've seen quite a bit of it. How would you, I was just kind of curious of your opinion, how you would change the compensation structure on a successful Agile organization.
Change the which structure?
Compensation structure.
Compensation
Because
structure.
most of the work's really being done bottom up at that point.
I hadn't thought of that. And what I want to change is the way that we review people,
Now,
so.
I'm talking about how they get paid.
Well, but that's how they get paid.
The team reviews themselves.
The compensation comes through reviews.
Matter of fact, I found that the managers the suck at reviews because they're not in the teams and they don't know what's really going on. So that's a different perspective as well.
In many companies, we don't know what's going on because we're matrixed. It's not different from that. We have to learn that 360-degree way of reviewing. And second, two, that 360-degree method of reviewing has to be about how the result on the team and the result on customers.
Yeah, but the teams
Not
are
the
more on
hero.
customers and managers are.
What's that?
The teams are focused more on customers than the managers are.
Yes, exactly. And so the
So
manager
how
need to
can
be
the
asking,
manager
that's
measure
that 360-degree part, right? We need to be asking the people on the team to review,
The manager.
to review the manager, but to review all the members of the team.
That's correct.
Team does a peer review of each other.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So shouldn't that change its compensation structure?
It does over time. Actually, compensation structure changes over time no matter what, but so there's two answers to that. One is the individual compensation changes, and if you do it well, it changes in the right ways. What doing it well requires is HR to change. And HR and finance and the rest of the organization, not to say that's that thing those developers do over there, but this is fundamental to our organization and we need to change it. We
So I
need
see
to all
Agile
change
as
this
a
over.
threat to the compensation structure of most corporations.
I'm sorry?
I see Agile as a threat to the compensation structure of most corporations.
Okay.
Yeah, because the
Maybe.
people who are actually with the customers change. The people who are getting the work done change. The people who are doing the reviews change. The people who are producing outcomes change.
It depends. So it depends. So I was a manager at Schwab and nobody can talk, the product, you were one of the guys who got to talk to customers
Mhm.
because of IRS regulations or,
It's not hiring.
What's that?
In fact, the SEC regulations.
The SEC regulations. Thank you.
IRS
Because of
control.
SEC regulations, only you have to be registered as a broker dealer or something or other. You have to have system series 7 or something,
Yeah, and the
9
financial.
or 13 or 17 or 82, in order to talk to customers. And nobody in programming staff had that stuff. So what I was saying about we need to look at our practices through the lens of the spirit of Agile, not the practices as rote practices. Especially it applies to this conversation because our customers are different, our regulation is different, our people are different, our culture is different, where we came from is different. There's so many differences that guide being successful
Right.
with
But the
software
conversation
development.
has to be
Software
different.
development is fundamentally a hard thing to do. Other questions? I'm going to go here and then here.
Wouldn't the best managers not be programmers at all? Because personality, and the type of training they would get in school.
One of the things the answer is yes, but very qualified. And the qualification is, we spend a bunch of time in the book talking about what it takes to be a good manager, and the very first of those is the respect of your team. Now, there aren't very many football teams that don't have a football coach who was a football player, professionally in the pros. Same with baseball teams, same with basketball teams, same with the having those kinds of conversations. That said, there are some managers who are so successful managing the rest of the organization for their teams, evangelizing their team's work, appreciating their teams, some of those people skills you were just talking about, that they're very successful technical managers. And they have to be really good listeners and really good facilitators of technical people, which is another hard thing to do if you haven't been one. We are an interesting group of people, we programmers. Other questions? Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay, so there were comments, and it was interesting actually talking about the adoption of Agile at Microsoft. If you just follow blindly, okay, well, here are the practices, just throw them at the company, adopt them blindly, following things, it doesn't really work. So what would you say about the role of managers, if there is one, to really find the right flavor of Agile that would fit the organization? Who can really facilitate adopting Agile, so we don't get in a situation where you are kind of like disarmed instead of being engaged?
Yeah, in my experience, Agile works best when it comes from both the bottom and the top. And when they're working together really, Agile works best when it's a collaborative. Collaboration is the essence of Agile. It's maybe the essence of software development, actually. Agile in a lot of ways is a collection of best practices that people have discovered over time that weren't necessarily obvious, and there's nothing common about common wisdom. It's really unusual, but yeah.
What are the top anti-patterns of doing Agile? People who think doing Agile but actually aren't?
Yes.
Or also, what percent of people who claim to be doing it are actually doing it?
Yeah. So that was a statement, right? It's not a question?
It's a question.
Oh, sorry.
Totally question.
Is that an anti-pattern? Yes,
What
it
are
is.
the top anti-patterns for people who think they're doing Agile but actually aren't?
Oh, okay. So I'll give you one that made my head throw back the first time, and then said, oh yeah. So this goes to the Scrum Master role. So when you walk into a stand-up, just observe. And if it's each person stepping up and sharing with the rest of the team what they did yesterday and what they're going to do tomorrow and what's standing in their way, you're probably looking at an Agile team. If, on the other hand, it's a series of one-off conversations between the Scrum Master and each of the team members, it's not an Agile team. The stand-up is about the team members talking to the team. It's not about conversations between the Scrum Master and the team members. That's one.
Now, when we were doing retrospective, if the team doesn't show up to hear the customer feedback, because they're just used to never being around customers. So that's a big anti-pattern because of just discomfort of being in the room and hearing that your stuff sucks and why it should change and how, and you're gonna hear stuff you've probably never heard before.
Yeah.
And so then there are people who just can't handle it and don't show up.
Okay. That was not a question.
That was an anti-pattern.
That was an anti-pattern, okay. Other questions?
I had a quick question. So in Scrum meetings, sometimes you have follow-up discussions that kind of come out of that conversation, right? How do teams handle it? Do they
The Scrum Master says, Bob and Susie, you've got a conversation you need to have. I've got the room for you. It's at this time.
Okay. What if other
Or
team
will
members
work
need
for
to
you at
hear,
this time.
other team members need to hear about that conversation?
Then we'll
Separately.
we'll take the whole team into the next room at that time. But time boxing is a key piece of Agile. It's critical not to screw that one up. Other questions, comments?
So, one of the things I deal with is very large projects now. But in the organization I'm in right now, it doesn't really have Agile at that scale. Have you dealt with very large, when I mean very large, I mean billion-dollar projects? What insights do you have on having, where you really have dozens of Scrum teams across multiple feature lines and themes and things? What kind of?
See, I haven't dealt at that scale.
Mhm.
I've dealt at the large scale, and they're sort of, as it grows, the first obvious one to do is Scrum of Scrums, right? And it's just blown up when you get to the size you're talking about. And the second one is doing planning, the one large room planning method where you've got team, gymnasium size room, you need it. Team, all around their own tables, doing physical card walls that then the other teams can come around and put their dependencies up on your card walls, and you've got this circulating, and it's sort of an all day, but you really get a lot of learning out of that. And then the third one is probably SAFE, the Scaled Agile Framework, which is getting a whole lot of adoption because it's a hard problem, and it's a very defined process. All right, thank you all.